and he began to work in Princeton in 1983, you say? It's basically my birth year, so. I will present more the way I'm working and what interests me more than directly the project in order to create also bridges with you and to be able to share other things later. So I did studies at the university. I have a bachelor in philosophy, another one in history, a master in geopolitics, and another one in European studies. And then I began a PhD in political sciences, and I stopped to do dance. So my director was a bit difficult for dance, but he understood. So now I am doing only arts. I am creating mainly installations and shows. And the installation I'm creating, it's on the logic of a show with a dramaturgy, but I will explain that later. And I am also working with the army as a reserve staff officer, and so I do training with them. And I also did a mission in Africa, in Mali, in Chad. And I will also talk a bit later, a bit about it, but it's more about the process. I will show you one of, will I? I will show you one of the last work, because so you will just see a bit the logic. Oh no, you don't use PowerPoint. There is a sound, but it's not very important in that video. So I am coming from the dance field, so usually I'm working with dancers. I'm creating dance shows with a lot of stuff, music and everything. But in that show, it's the only performer is the light, so it's the light as a dancer. You enter in a room, it's empty. You're invited to lie down on the ground, and just we tell you that it's possible to do what you want, basically in the room. The duration is 40 minutes, and you have a physical experience with the light, a bit like this. Yeah, I will just let you see a bit. So it's a show about vacuum, infinity. In a lot of my works, the starting point, it's like quite a broad question, as infinity is quite large. And then I work a lot with science, and especially physics, because for me, the physics, it's a way to raise metaphysical questions through physical objects. And for example, in physics, you have different definitions of infinity. And for me, it fits the process, it fits the reflection, and it gives me an object on, I work with. What I'm creating, it's very immersive, so you are inside the project, usually. There is kind of magic. It's a bit old-fashioned, but still I like it. And there is also like a sociological dimension, even a psychological dimension. For example, in that show, you are invited to lie down on the ground, but of course, it's not possible to refuse because you are in the museum or in the theater. So you are invited to lie down on the ground. But in fact, for this constraint, for me, it's a way to give freedom to the audience. Because you are in the museum, you are in the theater, you are invited to lie down on the ground, and then those 40 minutes, you are officially free to move. And you integrate because you began lying down on the ground, that in fact it's possible in that space to lie down, so it's also possible to sit, it's possible to move, it's possible to lie down in another place. It's possible to do what you want. The only limit, it's yourself and it's your link to the group. And in that show, for example, the experience you will live in that show, it depends a lot of the people with who you will be. In some groups, people, they are moving a lot. In some groups, people, they are beginning to sing. There are people beginning to dance also. It happens 3 times, like people made love in the show. And I mean, that's true, I saw it. So it's really possible to do what you want in that show. And the people who are like from the organization, they have like, I don't know in English, but like the order to not intervene, except of course if it's dangerous for someone. So the only limit is yourself, and we play on the condition of the experience. So the fact they are lying down, also, for example, the way we welcome the audience, we have a proximity. There is a way how we touch the audience to enter, because it's in the dark, so some people are hesitating when they enter. And we take them by the elbow, not by the hand, of course, to just make them comfortable and to trust what happens. So it can't look like it's kind of also, it can be closed from manipulation. But for me, it is a psychological aspect. It's more a way to give trust to the audience and to create a place where it's possible to be free. What I was saying, sometimes so I create installation, but there is always this relation to the time. For me, it's, there is a dramaturgy. We build something to the time, because it's, so I propose a place, and I also propose a moment to live an experience. In general, what I am doing for me, it's I am proposing experience to the audience. I am not proposing shows or installations. I am more proposing experience. And in fact, it's very close from something a bit, it's an antique vision of the theater. It's almost Greek in the Greek theater. When you were coming to the theater, it was to be transformed by the experience. And for me, the logic is the same, except that I don't want to transform the audience, because I don't have this kind of message, and I think it would be politically too difficult. So for me, it's more in the idea to propose a place to transform yourself. And the show I am doing, they are very open. So in that show, for example, for some people, it's there is this link to the infinity. People that have impression to be in the world without gravity. For some people, it's a show about God. For some others, it's a show about death, because they have this kind of tunnel at the end. So, but for me, the direction is clear. But you have a lot of possibility to take the show for yourself. I will talk also about one of the next shows. It's in Korea. I won't be there all the time. So in October and December, it won't be possible for me to be there, because I will play in South Korea and then in Brazil. And in South Korea, I am working on another project, but it's also to give you a bit the logic. The project will be called Whispers. I went there to do residence about the North Korea and South Korea and the relation between them. And in South Korea, a lot of people asked me what I was thinking about the situation there. And for me, as a French person, not knowing anything about South Korea, it was a bit difficult to answer to this question. So the project is to record the answer of the population, what they could place, what they could imagine if suddenly the frontier between North Korea and South Korea would disappear. And we'll record their answer, and in an empty space and big space, you will have those thousands of answers. So it will be like whispers in the room. And when you enter in the room, you have like a computer. It's possible to type your name and the name of your neighbor, and to hear the dream of the people there. And we already did a test, and it's the answer is a bit crazy. For example, there was an old guy. He said, "Yeah, it would be a place for the children of North Korea and South Korea. It would be only the children, and they would grow together, and so we'll never have a war anymore." So you have this kind of dream of utopia, and it's to share this kind of answers. And for me, it's also a way to give freedom to the audience, just to make things visible. And what interests me the most, it's you have Tolkien. It's the author of Lord of the Rings, so it's fantasy novels. But he wrote, like, when he's writing a story, he's always thinking about the mountains behind the story, and he wants to let's see the mountains behind the story. So you have like the scenario, but the people, they see the mountain and they can imagine a lot. And in my practice and what I'm creating, I think what interests me the most, it's not the story I am creating at the first place. It's not the mountain behind, but it's the place behind the mountain and this story at the first, because it's the place where the audience can be and can imagine what they want. So why I am here? I am developing several projects at the same time because in my practice the research part is important. In general, before to do a creation, I do at least 1 year of research, sometimes 2 years of research. So here I am working with a physics institute. And in the way I'm working, so I have like a starting idea, or it can be a feeling, it can be a principle. And how to create it, I will try to explore it. I will try to understand better what it means for me. So I have hypotheses, I have assumptions, I rework them, I suppress them. So it's in kind of scientific process. And for example, for this project, for Deep Out the Woods, with the light, at the origin it was a show with dancers. And I realized I already have dancers. It was the light, so I took off the dancers. And so we created it. We had also a soundtrack. And the day before the premiere, I also removed the soundtrack. So the composer wasn't really happy about it. But I removed the soundtrack because the soundtrack was working like very well, a bit too well. And it was creating another dramaturgy. And I noticed with the soundtrack, the audience tends to do more or less the same thing each time. And for me, I wanted to have a higher degree of freedom, so we removed the soundtrack in order to have like a higher degree of freedom for the audience. So here I am working on a new project. It's a project about the idea of the origin. So the origin, you can take it for yourself, for like sociological, in history, but for me it's more like the origin of the universe. And in the origin of the universe, we have this Big Bang theory, which works. Of course, there is gap, but it works. But in this Big Bang theory, when you arrive at the origin, there is something a bit magical, because you have like it's the Planck wall. I mean, our physics works for 13 billions of years, but when you arrive at the very origin, or what could be the origin of the universe, the density of the universe and temperature are so high that our physical models collapse. So today, by the science, we have a theory of the origin which explains everything except the origin. And there is something for me a bit magical. Of course, it's also a metaphysical question for me. And this project, it's like a kind of metaphor. So I want like to create, so it's a vortex of water, like a twister, but of water. It will be 7 meters high. And the audience will be right in the middle. So you can touch it. And for me, there is still this, it's still for me a dance object, because I want like to write the movement of the water, how it comes, how it plays with the audience, how it collapses, the rhythm. And you as an audience, you can touch the water. It's possible to touch this column of water, this impossibility. So I think it's a bit like before you will do a para-drop. If you dare to do it, you want it, but you are totally scared. And I think it will be the same thing with this object. And it's a physical relation to the object also, because you want to, you don't dare, but you still want to, and you feel something physical in yourself. So that will be a project like this. That is the technical, and that could be something like, some like this. Yeah, and this more like visualization about what could happen inside. This could be at the top at a moment, and we have something very kitsch, but still I like it. It's we can create something like this also. I will finish by the army part, which is so very different and very far from this. For me, so I'm working with the army as a reserve staff officer, more on political subjects. It's a way to feed me, to help me to rethink the world, also to escape a bit from the artistic stuff. And I like the art, but in general the political reflection in art is not so high. So with the army, it just push you to go like a bit beyond this. I did a show. I didn't want to do a show about this, but I did a show about this. It's because so when I was in Africa, it was Mali and Chad, and we find the diary of a jihadist, and he was telling his own story. And the diary is fascinating because he begins writing my diary to my parents, to valiant heart, nothing is impossible. And then he began, and it's writing as a novel, in fact. And the religious part is not very important. It's more social stuff. It's also ethnical stuff. And the analysis of the French army and the situation there was exactly the same, that the religion is basically nothing in the conflict. It's more like social problems, basically, and ethnical problems, and racism problems. So I did a show to talk about this. And also, I will say that to explain the process. And the show, at first, was really bad. Because I played it, and I played it as an actor, and I wanted to tell what was happening there. And then after the premiere, I realized it didn't really interest me, what was happening there precisely, because I am more interested in the process, in how things are working. And in fact, I was more interested of why he was here, but in general. And so for me, I realized like this jihadi stuff, it's just a flag. Probably 30 years ago, he would have been communist. Maybe in 30 years, he will be ecologist. This, I don't know, but the revolt he had, I understood it. And so the question for me was, why he fight? Why I was fighting also, and why do we fight? So that was more it began the topic of the show. And also for the AMU, the only things, the other things which interest me, they have the process to think and to escape from your own intuition. And this is interesting and also quite powerful, because the assumption they do is when you think, in fact, you don't think, you just take the hypothesis which confirm your own intuition at the beginning. But in fact, you don't try to discover, you just try to confirm yourself. And so they have a kind of process to escape from this. And when you do it, it takes a lot of time. It's at least a week for one question. So the first time I did it, the conclusion, it wasn't what I thought at the beginning. And for the first time, I had the impression I was tricking myself, or I was thinking beyond of myself. And this kind of process, for me, it's interesting for the art and in general, because it can just help you to think differently. So yeah, what I want to tell it was to present a bit the logic of what I am doing. When I am creating, I am shaping, reshaping, putting assumptions, destroying them. And it's, I think, quite close, in fact, from a scientific process. Maybe just the finality is the way is different, because I am using more feeling and also intuition. But I think I am sure you use the same thing, in fact, in a scientific process. Even sometimes it's not possible to say it. And maybe the difference just it's in the language, because I use the language without words. And so for me, it's a language less normative than the language. And so it gives me freedom, and it will give me freedom in the way I'm communicating with others. And so that's why I think I am working more in that field.